and welcome. My name is Melissa Rebronja, and I am an integrative healing practitioner and host at healyourheart.love. And today we have a very special guest, Lisa Erickson. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm really happy to be here with you.
Me too. I'm really excited about especially the topic that we're doing today. So Lisa is an energy worker specializing in women's energetics, sexual trauma healing, chakra manifestation, and kundalini awakening. She is the author of Chakra Empowerment for Women. This is the book, and as you can see, I use it a lot, right? Lisa is certified in mindfulness meditation instruction and trauma sensitivity, and has trained in a variety of energy healing and somatic modalities. She is a member of the Breathe Network, a nonprofit dedicated to supporting holistic healing and healers for sexual trauma survivors. I discovered you through Daily Om, the chakra class you had. What was the name of it?
Awakening the Feminine Chakras, I believe, was what they titled it. Yes.
So that introduced me to working with the energy body, with energy centers, and specifically with sexual trauma. Mm-hmm. And then I met you in person where I got my book copy. I was so excited that we lived in the same city.
Yes.
And then I did your 3-month intensive. That was really amazing. And it was 2020.
It was during COVID.
Yes, during COVID. And then I loved it so much that I did it again the next year. And then I also did your energy work practitioner training.
And I'm really honored to have you participate in all of those because you're just such a gifted healer yourself. And it feels so fortuitous because that book signing became one of the few I was able to do because the book came out in December 2019. It didn't really get into bookstores until February, and we closed down. We went to lockdown. So that was one of the only live book signings I got.
So glad that I made it to that.
That's how we met. Yeah.
Yes. And I also want to share that you were my first experience working with somebody who is trauma sensitive. I really felt it. There was something different about you, and I didn't have the description or the words. And now, of course, trauma informed, trauma sensitivity is more common, but you were definitely my first experience, and I really felt it and experienced it, and now also consider myself a trauma sensitive healing practitioner.
And so important because it's not often incorporated into training for a lot of modalities. And it's really key because you just never know what someone coming to you has experienced.
Absolutely. So today's topic is integrating the abortion experience energetically. And we wanted to talk about that. We had some discussions around what the title is going to be. We had processing, integrating, healing.
I think we started maybe with healing from abortion or something like that. And then talking it through, realized we did not want to imply that every woman feels they need healing, right? It's a very individual experience. For many, it's a simple medical decision and a simple medical experience, right? And so healing isn't quite the right word. And we didn't want to imprint that on it, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that's the case for many women, right? And then for others, it can be more complicated. And there's a variety of different reasons you may feel as if there is some emotional processing or energy work that you want to do around it. First and foremost, there's the physical level, right? There is a physical healing, a physical medical procedure, and some may need more energetic aid, or there are ways to speed physical healing of all types. So I often help people with that. But then also, even if someone is adamantly pro-choice and believes in our ability and our right to make this choice, there still may be emotional processing around the decision. And I find that some women who are very pro-choice may feel like I need to deny myself that emotional processing because then I'm somehow playing into the other side, that this is anything other than a medical decision. And I think there's space around it for more than that. So you can make this decision. It can be very clear cut for you, and you still have some emotions, or you can experience other people's thoughts about it. And I've seen this happen for many women where other people's reactions actually triggers processing that you didn't realize you would need, right? You feel very certain in your decision, but other people's reactions takes you off guard. And so there's a lot of layers to it. So that's why we came up with integrating, like, what's the energy work you might do around all of these different levels?
I love that. And I really, speaking about being trauma informed and trauma sensitive, that is definitely being a non-judgmental space for whoever we're working with. So that is the space that we're creating here today. With whatever decisions you've made or whatever you believe in, it's all welcomed. We're specifically talking about integrating the abortion experience. And I'm open to talking about my conditioning. Basically, I was raised in an atheist country, former Yugoslavia, and I grew up knowing that my mom had 2 abortions before my brother, after my brother, and I was basically the 4th pregnancy. And in fact, my mom was planning to abort me, and then my grandmother said, no, you're keeping this one. So of course, I'm happy to be here, but I don't feel any heaviness like, oh my God, I almost didn't exist. I was really raised with abortion is normal and natural. It's an unwanted pregnancy. So fast forward to being 21 years old, and this point I was living in Toronto, Canada, and I did accidentally get pregnant. I also had that very clear knowing that I was going to have an abortion. And my boyfriend at the time agreed. There was not a lot of discussion. It was just like, oops, we're having an abortion. And he supported me. And knowing that I'm a sensitive, intuitive person and coming from that conditioning, when I actually had the abortion, I remember I guess they give you something that makes you a little sleepy. So I slept it off. And then the next day when I woke up, I felt this heaviness in my psyche, or like, ooh, that was heavy. I just had this feeling that was heavy. And I told myself, well, next time I might just pause a little bit before I just go and do it. And then there were 2 times that I thought I was pregnant. The second time I did want to have an abortion if I was pregnant, but the boyfriend at the time was like, well, let's talk about it. Maybe not. And then the third time I was actually very open. I was in a long-term relationship, but then it turned out that I wasn't. And that was it. Now, most of my boyfriends at the time were just like me, unsure if we really want to have kids. Let's try it. You know, my last boyfriend was like, okay, we're going to try for a month. If we get pregnant, I'm staying in Canada and we're doing this life. If not, I'm moving to LA. So here I am living in LA.
Big life decisions. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm very comfortable with my decisions and very comfortable with not having kids, no regrets. Interestingly enough, I'm now married to somebody who has a 29-year-old kid, which would have been the age of my pregnancy, which I'm like, oh, that's interesting, right?
Yeah. To come in at this later point in their development. Yeah.
That's my experience. That's my story. I know there's many. I'm definitely consider myself pro-choice.
Yeah. Well, and thank you for sharing your story. I think that's so important. And my story is very similar. I also had an abortion in my 20s with a boyfriend who we both felt, no, this is not the right time. And I think I went into it feeling very decisive, very clear about that decision at the time, but it was in New York City. And this is, 35 years ago, just so we have a sense of how long abortion has been going on. There were protesters outside the clinic and they came every day. And this shifted my experience quite a bit, to have to walk through them and have to sit in the waiting room and hear that really started to trigger a sense of shame that I didn't have about the decision before that. And I think this is what can happen. And I became very cautious after that as to who I would share it with and who not. Even now, there's people I'm going to share that experience with, people I'm not. And that's something, there aren't that many things in your life, other medical procedures, you wouldn't really, you get your wisdom teeth out. You're not thinking, who can I tell? Who am I not going to tell?
Right.
So this has this loading onto it because of the cultural piece of it, right? Is part of what has to be integrated and processed. And then there is, like you experienced, that heaviness the next day. It's like, you really realize, oh, this was like one path not taken. And we have thousands of those kinds of life decisions that occur throughout our life.
Yes.
But this is one that's very definitive. where this path is not taken. I'm not having a child at this time, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I did go on to have 3 kids much later in life, and I don't regret my decision at all, especially after having kids and really understanding
Yeah.
what it takes
And you
to.
have 3 kids, is that
I have
correct?
3 and had them in my late 30s, and to really understand what it means, to raise children with a partner, I made the right choice for me. And my own spiritual beliefs support that. Personally, there was not a spirit linked at that time, and that occurs later, and that spirit has moved on. That's my personal beliefs, but that's part of why I'm pro-choice, that if you scan the world's religions, there in fact are a wide multitude of views on this. And then, of course, we also have many individuals who are atheists, as you were raised. And so that needs to be a personal decision. So yeah, without getting into the politics too much,
Yeah.
I think what I was trying to get at for both of us is what is that heaviness that you felt and that I felt, even though both of us were very clear about our decision. It wasn't a tortured decision, which for some women, it is a very difficult decision.
Absolutely, yes. And a lot of women make this decision secretly by themselves.
Right.
And they don't even share it with
That
the
weighs
partner.
on you.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And that's part of
And
the
we
reason I
both
wanted to do this. Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
because I literally know women in my life that have made that decision privately and quietly, whether it's shame from family or also not wanting to include because maybe the partner is not safe.
I've worked with many women who've had that experience as well. And then that becomes part of what we need to work with, because it is possible to hold a secret by choice and not feel shame. But all too often, when we are holding something secret, it is entwined with this sense of shame. And shame, emotionally and in our energy body, from an energy perspective, is such a heavy weight on us.
Yes.
So learning to come to a place of acceptance and maybe still deciding, okay, there's still certain people I am choosing not to tell about this, but that isn't because of a feeling of shame, and really releasing the feeling of shame is important. And there's a lot of different ways to do that.
Absolutely. So let's talk about that. With the women you work with, how have you seen abortion impacting women? What kind of energy work do you do around this?
Well, for one thing, it is a physical procedure. Of course, also there is the pill version now, but there is some physical process that's occurring. There may be medical trauma around that, right? Depending on what someone experiences and how they're treated. So sometimes in the aftermath, we're working with some of that. Often there's ways to work with the sacral chakra and the heart chakra in particular in the aftermath of any medical procedure, to help soothe your nervous system and empower your body's physical healing capacity, right? So on one level, our energy body is linked to our physical body. It's also linked to our psyche and our spirit, but at that level linked to the physical body, you can really work with your heart and your sacral in particular to help really kind of speed healing up and soothe your nervous system, which is so essential for the physical healing to take place. And there is physical healing. So that's number one. Then number two is really working with the emotions. Sometimes individuals feel they want to do some sort of ritual. They do feel as if the pregnancy was connected to a particular spirit, and they want to say something to that spirit. They want to have a sort of ritual around, this wasn't the right time, I wish you well, and thank you, goodbye, and this kind of thing. And that can be helpful for some women that isn't part of their spiritual beliefs, and so it isn't helpful, it isn't needed. Others, it's more about just, even if they don't want to do that, they need some sort of, or they don't feel a need for it, there's some emotional processing around this having been a big life decision, and there's still some grief around it, and just honoring that grief, holding space for that grief, just acknowledging it, not pushing it away, verbalizing it, and then kind of moving through it, as we always do with grief. Grief is something that with time you move through to acceptance and you face your life forward. When and if it's the right time for me to have a child later on, I'll be ready. Moving into that. And then the fourth level, so this is a lot. I think I've already named 3.
Yeah.
The fourth is if there is sort of reactions of others, an unsupportive partner or friends or protesters or cultural imprints shaming, and there's some sort of internalization of that, working to release that, working through that, those imprints, releasing those imprints from your subtle body. I've worked with women where that's come up 20 years later. Like when they
Wow.
have the abortion, they feel fine about it. And then later on in their life, something happens, whether it's a new religious affiliation, or they have children themselves, or they're now with a partner who is not pro-choice. And all of a sudden, this feeling around, do I tell this person or not? And that creates complications that brings up feelings they weren't anticipating. So there's, all these different levels.
Right. Yeah. Because all we want is places and spaces where we're accepted for all that we are and all our past decisions. And I love your openness and how you can meet women wherever they are. Speaking of beliefs, when I found out that my mom had 2 abortions prior to me, and I'm technically the 4th, I always wondered if I was maybe that second one, possibly. And then it's like, oh, not yet. And then I just came eventually. So my mom's spirit was meant to have these 2 children. And then she decided when the timing is right.
Yeah, I think scanning different world religions, and even within, say, for example, Buddhism, there's variation in how it's covered, or Hinduism, Eastern religions, and within Christianity also. But the theology varies a lot, and that's very interesting as to when a spirit is linked to a fetus. In some, it's the moment of conception, but the line is considered like the spirit doesn't actually come in till the 3rd trimester. That's what I've read a lot in a sort of Eastern texts. Is this the idea that there is a karmic momentum, not exactly a spirit, but there is this karmic connection to the future being right from the moment of conception, but it isn't person, right, until the first breath. That's where it's very different. And then, of course, for some, there is no spirit, right? We are a biological creature. And so that component doesn't exist. But what is so interesting is the wide range. And then there are other teachings that really hold, okay, there may be a link there, but it's still the prioritization of maternal choice and health that takes priority over that. So there's a lot of different beliefs. Yeah.
And this is from my husband's personal experience, is he believes that the spirit chooses the parents. And he actually had that experience where he was on tour, he was a musician, he literally walked into the lobby of a hotel in Germany and saw a woman sitting at the bar. And he knew that he was going to walk up to her. He didn't know what he was going to say. And the first words out of his mouth was, "So you're the mother of my child." And then she looked at him and said, "So it's you." And
wow.
It shocked both of them. And they did get together. They did have a kid. And then as soon as the kid was born, they disconnected. Like they were no longer connecting. And they ended up separating.
So he feels like the child connected them.
Literally, that was his experience. He's not religious, he's more of spiritual, but he does work with energy. He's done some energy work, healing and stuff. So he just really felt like the spirit of his son just put these 2 people together, and and here he is. And then things change between
the complexities of karma too. When we talk about karma, like there's these karmic momentums. I think the interesting thing about pretty much any teachings on karma, when you get under the hood a little bit, is that there still is always free choice. That is really what the spiritual process is that you can exercise free choice in relationship to karma. So you can have this karmic connection to this being that might want you to be its mother at a certain time, and still make the choice that this is not the right time for me, and send that message, right? So there's that whole piece of it that can be helpful for people to understand.
There's so many interesting stories. And I do know this one woman. I feel really bad for her because she was a 16-year-old. She actually went to the clinic. The people that were working there were quite rude to her because she was, I forget how many weeks. And because of the stern judgment, she decided not to have the abortion, even though that was her decision. And, felt that she didn't make a decision for herself. Out of shame, she decided to have the kid.
And that's the hard thing, because there is a time limit to some extent on the decision. And especially for many young women, they don't have the awareness of their body yet, really, or of the process. So that's a whole piece of it. And to feel as if it's beyond your control, I think, is very difficult.
I think it's sad when it's not a decision that we make for our body, because that's a whole, it's like not really being in our power.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a lot of this is about, is agency. And for me, as you know, a lot of that is like navel chakra. Like women, if we were to look at it sort of from a chakra perspective, often our navel chakra is sort of underdeveloped, or we haven't fully claimed our right to full agency in our lives and the ability to create boundaries, and in the same way that most men might be conditioned to do so, even in this day and age, right?
Hmm.
And so that creates this waffling, this indecisiveness. And then that feeling of shame, often that's sort of imprinted. I'll feel it very heavy on the sacral chakra, which is linked to our ability to feel good about our feminine power. I mean,
Yes.
part of what the fear of unwanted pregnancy can do is make you almost fear your own body and relate to your body as potentially problematic. And I think so many women already can be conditioned to relate to their menstrual cycle that way, right? All of that imprints and impacts, right, our relationship to what it means to be in a female body. And that impacts our sacral chakra. So that's the real price of these kinds of imprints, is not feeling good about what it means to be in a female body. You want to feel good about it, right?
Oh,
It's a
absolutely.
problematic thing.
I
Yeah.
mean, as you say that, I mean, that's been my journey. I don't know. I think I was conditioned, ooh, female bad, male good. And I had like my
Yes.
teenage years, I want to be a boy, right? Because I was like, it's better to be a man. So I rejected my femininity or anything feminine. And it's been a long journey to then embrace my femininity and be happy that I'm in a female body. That's a whole other topic.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it is a piece of this, in a way, within the context of feminine empowerment, is feeling you have choice, so
Yes.
that your reproductive health doesn't feel like a burden and your reproductive cycles don't feel like a burden. And when I look at it from a chakra perspective, that sacral chakra in our pelvis is linked to our reproductive system. And that's sort of where things get held. And if we don't relate well to that sense of being a woman, if it feels like a burden, if it feels like a danger, sexual trauma, lack of reproductive choice, all of those things can kind of imprint there and make us relate to being female as a liability. And then the other aspects of our sacral chakra, creativity, free expression, that kind of joy,
Hmm.
being alive, are also somewhat repressed. So that's why, I really feel sacral chakra work for men too right now is really for everyone. It's really for
Hmm.
everyone. That
Hmm.
part of us is repressed to some extent in our culture.
Yeah, my understanding is that the first three chakras are the heaviest, like that's where the human experience is.
Yeah.
So that's where most of the work is.
Yeah, certainly. Well, as you know, yeah, that's where I feel most people need to work. It's like the root chakra is our physical body, our sacral chakra is our emotional body, and our navel's our mental body. Then the heart is relationships, right? So those four are pretty much the
Right.
majority of our human experience. And yet when you come to the chakras, people often want to work up. They want to do third eye, mystic experience, all of which is beautiful. But the core of our growth and our health often lies in working with everything linked to the lower chakras.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about physical healing. What kind of energy work can help with that?
Yeah. So physical healing from an abortion can vary a lot. For some, it's a very simple procedure that there aren't a lot of complications from, and they feel good within a day or two. For others, it takes a little longer. There's a lot of cramping or blood that can feel very draining, and your whole lower body needs to heal. So I really work with sacral lotus, one of my favorite visualizations in that space of this beautiful flower in the pelvis, that feeling of opening up that energy in the sacral chakra. That's the area of the body impacted by an abortion. And it is also the chakra associated with regenerative energy, right? It is the
Yeah.
creative life force energy. So really generating that regenerative energy along with heart energy, like extending heart chakra energy to yourself is self-care, right? You're like
Yes.
sending soothing heart chakra energy into your nervous system and your lower body to physically complete the healing process.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm tempted to show the image of the sacral lotus because it's so beautiful, which is in your book. Here it is.
Yeah, just while you're doing that, yeah, it's it's a counter to the traditional kundalini drawings that really anchor the energy body in the root chakra. And a lot of teachings teach that in a biologically female body, it's anchored in the second chakra. And there's a range there for people who identify as gender fluid and non-binary. But if we're talking in terms of biological sex, there's usually this spectrum of root versus sacral anchoring.
That makes sense. Yes. And for the ritual you mentioned, how do you incorporate different spiritual beliefs?
Yeah, I really just talked to someone about what do they believe, right? Do they believe there was a particular spirit? Do they believe this was a potential body that would link to a spirit later on? Like, do they want to approach this as speaking to a being, a particular being, or more speaking to a potential future? So sometimes it's about just like letting go of this one potential future that I've decided not to pursue. And to others, it's like, no, I feel like there is a specific being trying to be born through me. And I want to explain to that being why now wasn't the right time, and wish them well and send them love on their way. And then we just sort of do that. We visualize it and do that as a ritual.
Yeah. It feels so good, like you checking in with me, what are my beliefs, and then working with that.
Yeah.
That feels so empowering, rather than you telling me what I should be thinking or believing. It's so empowering. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for your work. I felt that.
Good, good.
Yeah. How can women work with the cultural imprinting that sometimes occurs, the sense of being judged or shamed for the decision? I know we talked about that, but how would you work with the client?
Usually it's very somatic work, meaning, okay, think of a moment in which you felt judged. You saw something on TV or someone said something or you read something that went, where do you feel it in your body? Right.
Yeah.
And I would say it's very individual. I think most often people feel it either like in their heart as sort of a caving in, sometimes in the pelvis, right in the sacral chakra, sometimes in the throat, like a throat constriction. Those would be the three most common. And then we'll work then with chakra work in those areas to open it up. I'm always going to be working with the sacral because at a more archetypal level, that's where shame is usually imprinting in some way. But then to the extent someone's feeling judged in their heart, constricted in their throat, we're also going to work with releasing that, revoking the imprints stored, and affirming a counter imprint.
Beautiful. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm familiar with some of those practices, and they are so powerful.
Yeah, and they're very simple, like anyone can understand them, but it is very powerful to just name something, put into words, something that may have been hanging out unconsciously. You put it into words, you can let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very good. Thank you. How is this part of the larger themes of feminine empowerment and healing?
To me, it's really about that feeling of agency.
Yeah.
Right? We have full agency to make decisions about our lives. And not that it doesn't impact anyone else and no one else has any say in it, but that we have a right really to make decisions about this body, right?
Yeah.
And really also in terms of all that imprinting we talked about, in terms of how feelings of shame and feeling bad about your own body or fearing your own body in a way can really dim your sense of your own power in the world, right? Because we're here in a body. That embracing that, even though it's complex, embracing the complexity of it, and then really moving forward from there, that's chakra empowerment for me, or that's the role chakras play in sort of feminine empowerment.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa. Do we want to talk about the political situation in the United States?
I don't know. Not much more beyond what we said in terms of the cultural imprinting. I don't know if there's any way for me to talk about it really without judging someone else's religious beliefs. So to me, we kind of already said it. Like, I recognize there are religions but to me, it's about separation of state and religion, right?
Absolutely. I think, it's a sad situation. And recently this week, I don't know if you heard, but there was a 17-year-old girl who was arrested.
In Nebraska or something, right?
Nebraska, for taking a pill to end her pregnancy. It's like, wow.
There's also a case in Texas right now with a woman who her child in utero was diagnosed with a disease that it was not going to be able to survive, and she was forced to carry the baby to term and watch it die in
Wow.
4 hours, rather than aborting it after the diagnosis, which would have been the case before. And
Yeah.
what was the point of that, right?
Yeah.
So there's a case going on about that too. So this kind of stuff is going to be playing out for years, and the price is women. They're the ones suffering the most for this.
Yeah. It's very sad. It feels like we're taking a few steps back before we take one step forward.
So that's why I feel like this discussion is so important, even without this add-on that we did on the politically, because it's just putting something out there that is like, however you process this, it's okay. If you feel grief around it, that's okay. That doesn't mean
Yes.
you're betraying the pro-choice movement. Like, you can be pro-choice and still have feelings around this that you need to process.
Yes, absolutely. Anything else that you'd like to say that hasn't been shared yet?
I really just think the most important thing is honoring your own emotions and not editing them, and just working with however you're actually feeling. And especially in relationship to abortion, it can be complex. You might be pro-choice and still feel grief, and feeling and processing that grief is not betraying being pro-choice. Or you may not feel grief, and other people might be projecting onto you that you should, right? And if you don't, you don't, right? So it's just not judging, just being honest, meeting yourself where you are, processing whatever you're feeling, and moving forward with your life, right? With no regrets, because we have so many decisions that we make in life. And it's really important that we always just move forward with whatever wisdom we've gained, and don't get stuck revisiting the past over and over and over.
Yeah, easier said than done sometimes.
Easier said than done most of the time, but
Yes.
it really gets away what life is all about. Yeah.
Yes, trusting the decisions that we've made.
And
point
moving
in
forward
time.
from that.
Yeah. And I'd like to add that I work with human design, and interestingly, human design is not a religion or anything like that. It's just the mechanics of the Maya and how things work. So according to human design, at 6 months in our mother's belly, that's an important date of when we inherit our epigenetics, and we get imprinted by our design. It's known as the design, our unconscious conditioning. So
that's so interesting, because that ties to a lot of traditions that I've read about, where it's the 3rd trimester before spirit or kind of karmic mind state is linked to the physical.
And prior to that, according to human design, we're just like this vehicle that's being built. So I guess in some ways, human design supports abortion in a way, like it's not important until the 6-month mark. Lisa, you are wonderful. And I'd love to just ask you, what's next for you, for those of people who are interested in working with you?
Yeah, well, I'm still doing private sessions, and I'm announcing my fall course load soon, including another practitioner round soon. And I'll also be announcing some new stuff that I'm working on. So we'll see if that's on my website by the time this airs.
That's awesome.
I'll have it out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And where can people contact you?
EnlightenedEnergetics.com. And then on Facebook and Instagram, Chakra Empowerment.
Wonderful. Yay. Well, thank you, Lisa, for being here and for discussing this very important topic. And hopefully we'll have you back again.
Thank you, Melissa, for being courageous and wanting to cover it for the benefit of others, and inviting me to be here, and for doing your healing work in the world, which I know is benefiting many.
Thank you. Thank you.
Know what's best for you. Yes, you do. Yes, you